seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here's your career affirmation. You're going to rock that interview and get that job. Good morning, friends. I'm Anna Morgan, your Career BFF. Today is Thursday, and we're talking all about working with recruiters, how to answer the most common recruiter questions that you're going to get when you get that initial message to say, hey, we're interested in your background, would love to set up a call. So please say hello in the comments. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Just say good morning. Make sure that you are connecting with each other in the comments. And then I would love for you all to participate this morning and share in the comments what are the most common questions that you typically get. Is it, after the pleasantries, like, hey, just tell me about yourself? Or do they go right into, why are you interested in this job? What are your current responsibilities? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Typically recruiters will ask a variety of different questions, but you all are in the trenches. You are the best resource for market intelligence. So I want to hear from you in regards to the questions that you're most commonly getting in those first calls with recruiters. So we have Dan is up early this morning. Elizabeth and let's see who's from Kansas City. Brandy, although I can't see your name, your settings are set private. So you come up here, but for some reason I can see it on my other screen. So thank you for being here. I'm so glad to have you all join. I am here every Thursday at noon Eastern Standard Time, and each week I have a different theme. So I'm the creator of the BFF method to job search strategy, which is really about being a career BFF to yourself, doing the inner work so you can show up to be your best self when you're networking, applying for roles, interviewing, managing opportunities, and also taking care of yourself. So the first B stands for behind the recruiter curtain, which is what we're doing today. The F stands for focused and fulfilling strategy, meeting you where you are at in regards to what are the steps that you need to take to start more conversations, and get more opportunities to land your dream job. And then the last F is fabulous self-love, because I am a huge believer of taking care of ourselves, loving ourselves through this process, because it's messy. We have to do a lot of that self inquiry to really figure out what we really want to do, who we want to be, what is going to be the type of work that's going to light us up and, meet the needs of our life, our family, our situation. And then the fourth week of the live series is typically an Ask Me Anything, or I may have a guest, kind of keep it open in that regard. So that is the show format. And Julie here. Thank you for always in. Again, please feel free to drop the typical questions that you're getting from recruiters in the comments, so I can see that and we can talk about it, because again, I believe that you all are the experts because you are in probably active job search, or maybe you're a recruiter, and the landscape of the job search journey is evolving, I feel like, by the day, the month, the quarter. And all recruiters are created differently. And there are certain questions that I would say some ask and some don't. And, again, to like ease the nerves and help you, empower you to put your best foot forward. Really want to share some of my expertise and experience in ways that you can manage up to those conversations, build the rapport and the connection, and get the desired result. Because really, the result when you're talking to a recruiter is to give them a comprehensive overview of who you are, what you're all about, and what you're capable of doing, right? So that they can look at what they know of the organization, the hiring manager, and to mutually determine if there's a fit, and then likely to get a next step. Okay. So let me check the, damn. Okay. So when you are talking to recruiters, you're probably going to have three different like types or buckets of questions. So one could be behavioral questions. The others could be like, what if? And then some, others might, have like a role playing kind of aspect where, they might watch how you react to, a potentially changing question. Usually in those situations, they will give candidates a heads up on that. But one theme that I saw recently, on some comments on a TikTok I did, was that several people were saying it would be so nice if recruiters could give candidates the questions ahead of time. And I thought that was really interesting. So I did also a poll a couple months ago asking people. It was a 2-part post, and it was literally asking folks, like, what is the first question recruiters ask you? And most people were saying that recruiters are still asking the whole, like, tell me about yourself question, which I have really strong feelings about, because I feel like that's too much of an open-ended question, and it wastes time in the interview process, because I think candidates get nervous and they're not sure how much to cover and how far back to go. And I believe in order to have an even exchange of conversation, having a little bit tighter of questions that have more of like a container feel to them, really create a win-win for both people in the situation. However, I am, unique in that matter. So in order to be prepared to answer the tell me about yourself question, that's where you want to practice your, 30-second to 1-minute pitch, with a story, because storytelling sells. So if you can concisely talk about, in a short frame of, who you are, what you've done, some of your key accomplishments, and, maybe even end the like that part of it, why you're excited about having the conversation. That would answer, one of the coming questions that a lot of recruiters ask, which is, what's prompted your interest in this, or why are you looking to make a change? And that is obviously an area that recruiters pay attention to. So things that you want to be cautious about is, never speaking negatively or, too outwardly negatively about your employer. Some other areas that recruiters are conscientious of, it all being about, the money. They also pay attention to, how much you know about the company. And again, kind of that alignment, like what prompted your interest in said company. So you will also get these questions that are, again, like, tell me about your strengths, tell me about your weaknesses. How do you handle mistakes? Again, why are you leaving your job or wanting to leave your job? And with a lot of the recent layoffs, when if your resume is up to date and shows dates that you're no longer employed, the recruiter should tune into that. And a lot of candidates sometimes put on their on their resume, part of a furlough or a layoff or a reorg, just so they don't have to answer that question, which, on one hand, as a recruiter and someone who's experienced a layoff, I don't think there's anything wrong with, having that on your resume. So Elizabeth said, yes, I'm so glad you said this, Elizabeth, because this is one of my favorite questions. What is your favorite part of your job? And then I also like to ask, towards the later part of the conversation, based on your career history, what's been your favorite position in your career and why? And I think that gives a lot of insight into, the candidate, right? Like, you can tell whether you're in person or over the phone how people's like energy and excitement changes when they're really talking about something that really fueled them or that they feel really comfortable with. And then that empowers me to look at those aspects of that job responsibilities. Okay, I can connect the dots. And then it empowers the recruiter to help sell you to said hiring manager or opportunity. All right. So we have a couple more people here. So if you haven't said hello in the comments, please do. So typically, practicing tell me about yourself is a big one. Knowing, what's interested you in the company, just a brief snippet, and that also demonstrates that you have done a little bit of research about the company. There's a fine line because I believe that recruiters, we should be well versed in the client or the company that we're representing. And we are happy to explain to you the size of the company, why the position is open, are some of the key areas that the hiring manager is looking for. But I've also had calls with candidates where, we scheduled the call and we get on and they're like, what job is this for again? And I'm like, really? It was in the email confirmation. And then when I asked the question, what's prompted your interest in said company or position, they like say something that the company is a part of another company, or that they don't really understand or have even a base foundation understanding of what the company does. I had a candidate one time where she was like, and this is when I was representing a flooring company, and she was like, yeah, like I saw your name on the billboard on the highway, and I think you do this, and it was just like, I was like, wow, okay, well, here, I'll tell you about the position. But it just didn't, it kind of made the conversation a little rocky. And, we are paying attention to that, right? The communication style, the attention to detail through the process. I've noticed over time, if there are steps that are missed in those early processes, or late cancellations or just like the series of unfortunate events coming up through the situation with the candidate that, you know, a lot of times it's demonstration of how they may work in the working environment. And I'm like the most, you know, graceful, compassionate person when it comes to, you know, things happening where you need to reschedule. And again, I say that as a self-proclaimed uh, calendar dyslexic, you know, being in that space of, you know, giving people some grace. So Dan said he avoids asking some of the questions. Least, tell me more, Dan. You know, I think there's definitely an opportunity, even for like myself, to level up in asking better questions to candidates. But typically, you know, these are the questions that we most commonly see or that I've talked with my candidates about. You know, they may ask like, describe, you know, a time that you were faced with conflict and how did you resolve it? What is your working preference? Like, do you like to work in groups or do you find that you work better independently? You know, I think they're obviously also going to ask you like basic logistics questions of, you know, what is your work preference? Can you do hybrid, on-site, remote only? You know, is this location preference okay for you? And then a lot of times, you know, depending on your state and the salary expectations and goals, you know, are changing. So some recruiters may ask you, you know, what your salary goals are. But again, there is a lot of updated information on where recruiters can, you know, directly ask about comp. I believe it's our job to tell you as the job seeker a rough range to make sure that we're playing on the same field. Yeah. And I agree with you, Dan. I'm more on the conversational approach as well, because it's human to human. It doesn't have to feel like an interrogation. But I think you and I are, you know, in a different percentage that a lot of recruiters go right into these kind of structured questions, especially those having been trained in more of like the agency style background. So you might also get questions like, what are some of your, you know, favorite aspects of your recent role or current role? Let's see, what else did I find here? You know, tell me about a time where you failed, right? And what did you learn from it? And I really feel like those types of questions, I mean, yeah, they're hard. And again, not my favorite. It's about storytelling, right? And understanding where you can use kind of the star or par format. I prefer par because it's one less word, which is problem, action, result. And a lot of people tend to get hung up in the problem and the steps that they took to solve the problem, but oftentimes get hung up on the actual tangible results. You know, how much money that it saved the company, how it helped the organization, the hiring team, or, you know, the direct manager, you know, accomplishments or results based. So yes, I think having a conversation is key. Again, I don't think that's necessarily the norm with most recruiters. You know, I think, again, the way the industry is structured right now, that a lot of recruiters are not super well trained. So they go to these like basic, tell me about yourself, tell me your strengths, your weaknesses, why are you looking for a new role? What prompted you, you know, to be interested in this company? Are these preferences correct? Another thing that people are going to ask is, great point, Julie, finding the balance in how much detail to give in responses. Yeah. So, you know, that's why I would suggest, you know, grabbing these basic questions and making some note cards or just a quick document that you can kind of write out your story and practice those, on your own or with an accountability partner. I mean, talk to your pet. Aurora loves it when I practice with her. And you can also record yourself. I love to use the voice note feature on my phone, or I use Otter AI as a way to listen back and also see the things that I say in text. That's really powerful, I think, for candidates that are practicing interviewing, because oftentimes we may say things that are fantastic and might need to be included in our resume. And also, when we see the text, it also kind of reinforces that story. And as we get more comfortable with our story, answering these questions, that elevates our confidence. And confidence is what really makes that connection, right? Having that back and forth conversation, that rapport with the person, letting it be an equal exchange of energy, and not being afraid to answer the question and then be quiet. And this is especially hard for people that have never had any training in sales, because that's one of the things that we learn early on, is to answer the question and then basically like shut up. Like sometimes I remember early on, and I think this is something that I still struggle with sometimes today, is you want to talk more because you think, that what you might have said is not quite enough. But again, it's all about listening to the question that's asked, assuming the question is a structured one that you can understand and execute with ease. And oftentimes, another good thing to do through this process to manage up to recruiters is repeat the question, and say, Dan, I heard you say, this, is that correct? And then it gives your brain a second to pause and kind of think through how to answer the question. I can't remember who I was telling this to the other day. My last interview at my current employer, she was my toughest interview, and it was a fair amount of situational interview questions. And I was probably 30 seconds into answering the question, and I totally blanked, completely forgot what the question was. And I was in like mid-sentence. And for a moment, I was like horrified. But then I kind of stepped back and I just had to kind of laugh and ate some humble pie and said, kind of made a joke about it. And we had a good laugh. And then I was able to recalibrate and get back into the conversation. So that definitely happens too. And I think what I learned from that situation was to repeat the question for my brain, has really helped me as I've been doing, more interviews with different people for different conversations, like podcast appearances and stuff like that. So any other like tough questions that you all face as you are going through this journey? I was just double checking my notes here. There's another question like, how would you handle negative comments from a manager who's not your boss? That's a kind of weird one. What would your current or former boss say are some of your greatest strengths or weaknesses? I think that's a pretty common one. Let's see. Yeah. I mean, I believe with interviewing, it's all about, doing a decent amount of preparation, but it's also about like knowing your resume inside and out. And that tends to be a little bit of the challenge for folks that are constantly over customizing their resume. But the basic story is to answer, these basic questions. I think everyone should have pretty standard document or note cards or notes where they've, taken the time to think through these questions instead of just like having to think on the spot. Again, that all increases that confidence. And Julie, to your point, as far as finding the balance and how much detail to give, I think it's, focusing on making sure the details are in service of someone who's like not in your industry or hasn't done that work, that they get a basic story of, you know, the primary purpose of what you were doing, the type of organization that you're supporting, what the goal of the uh, situation was, and then again a few of the different steps that you took to reach that outcome. So, you know, there is no magic wand or, you know, perfect little structure to follow. Again, I'm going to always say it's the inner work that sells the resume or sells you. You know, that's why I focus on taking care of yourself and really focusing on that fabulous self love to build that confidence and know your value, and stand in your power and be able to tell these stories in a way that you feel good about. And then also, like my post that I shared yesterday about doing some of those breathing exercises before you go into a conversation. But the biggest thing is, you know, releasing the fear of rejection. And those are such simple words, but in execution and being willing to like let go of that is so incredibly hard for most of us, right? Because we're humans and we want to be accepted. And for many people, the job search journey has a lot of angst and worry and financial insecurity attached to it. And so being able to just like let go and trust the process is very counterintuitive. But, you know, we attract what we're meant to have, I believe. And when we stand in confidence and tell our story and feel good about the words that we're using to build that relationship with the recruiter and meet them wherever they are, and just be an acceptance of how you did in that conversation. You know, make sure that you have questions prepared to ask, so you have all the details so you can measure and evaluate the opportunity, you know, with all the moving parts to make a good decision. And then setting expectations, knowing what to expect as you move through this process. One other question that you will commonly get from recruiters, because there are positions that are still in demand and highly competitive, they will ask you, you know, where you are in the interview process. Are you actively working with any other recruiters, or are you close to, you know, securing an offer with another company? And this is a great question, I feel, for recruiters, not to be nosy, but also to like manage the process for you. And it depends on the recruiter that's asking that. If it's a agency or executive recruiting firm or direct hire placement, you know, their job is to kind of project manage that process for you. So within reason, you know, give them the detail that you need. If you're interested in the opportunity, to set the timeline, you know, you don't have to go into necessarily big detail of who the company is or the position or any of that stuff. Because I will tell you, a lot of agency folks back in the day, one of the ways that they would get new clients would be to ask candidates, like, where are you interviewing? And then they would be like, hey, I hear you have an opening. So be conscious of not oversharing necessarily that information, especially if you're still in play with said organization. I think it's fine if you have the relationship with a recruiter and you know it's a company that you're not going to pursue at the time. You can share at that time, but, you know, just be cautious. So, all right, I have done enough talking. Any other questions? We are at 12:29. I like to keep these at 20, 30 minutes tops. So if you know, are in process and find you get a squirrely question, again, take a moment, repeat the question, ask for clarity. Again, you know, recruiters are not the end all be all. They're human too. Sometimes they don't ask great questions. Sometimes they're not prepared. But for you to sell yourself and show up as your best self, you know, taking the time to practice some of these questions, understanding the problem, action, the result, you know, anticipating these questions will set you up for success. And it will elevate the conversation, as well as being willing to, ask great questions about the opportunity, about the recruiter, about the client, about the organization, and making sure there's alignment there. So, all right. Dan, we'll talk about that offline. I'm not sure where we're going. Dan said someone bought John's shirt with his face on it, and that his face is outlawed in public. And the face that you see of Dan Roth all over are photos that I helped him create. So anyway, let's see. Today is my little woman's birthday, y'all. She's 14, and this week has been a pretty interesting week. I have a major water issue at my home. I have a 2-story house on a slab, and evidently I have a big old leak in the cement slab underneath my house. So I have been turning off the water to the house a couple times a day, and dealing with that. And then I have company coming in town this evening to celebrate with my little person. Jeffrey, good question. Is it okay to ask when to expect to hear back after an interview? Once the time lapses, what is the best way to ask for feedback? I think this is a smart question, Jeffrey. When you wrap up an interview with a recruiter, I advise people to, obviously thank the recruiter for their time, and ask them about the interview process. And you can even ask them, like, based on our conversation, I feel like this is a good fit. Do you think your hiring manager will think this is a good fit? What are the next steps in the process? So one, you want to understand, if the recruiter feels good about presenting you to the hiring team, and if they do, and, you get the thumbs up, how many interviews will be in the process? That's a really smart thing to ask. And then I even would ask recruiters, when's the best time to follow up with you, and how do you like me to follow up with you? Do you prefer an email, a text, a direct message? What is your preference? I want to be respectful of how busy you are, and with your time. But I would like to know where I stand with this opportunity, and give the recruiter an opportunity to answer the question, right? And then that way you're setting the expectation of wanting feedback, and that you will follow up in accordance to what works for them. A lot of times, just pure bandwidth, it's going to be difficult for recruiters to get back to everyone. But if you have been through the process, or, past the recruiter conversation, you typically have earned the right to ask for feedback, and or like where you are in the process. So I think, typically at the end of the call, Jeffrey, is to just ask their preference, and even ask them that question. So what about a thank you email? When should I send it? Ronette, I believe sending thank you emails pretty quickly after the conversation. I think that always looks super impressive. As soon as I hang up the phone, and within a couple hours, I have a thank you email or message from a candidate. And then if you are scheduled with a hiring manager, and the recruiter or sourcer is working with you on that, sometimes you can ask them for the email address, but a lot of times they'll say just to send it to them, and they'll forward it on. I'm seeing a trend where people are getting away from including the hiring manager's email addresses. And some organizations are just a little more particular about that. So it's better to, just ask the questions, and following up, Ronette, with a thank you, and just kind of summarizing. I think a lot of times people send thank you notes, but I think there's a way that you can be creative with sending a thank you note to stand out and be memorable. And that, is either highlighting something that you really appreciated about the conversation or the person, reframing where you felt like there was mutual synergy about the opportunity, and then closing the email with kind of setting expectations about next steps. So helping folks with outreach content, follow-up content is something that I really enjoy and I've been doing more of with my clients. So great question. All right. So I hope everyone has felt well supported. Next week is focused and fulfilling strategy. If you have a job search strategy question that is, giving you some grief, send me a direct message and I'll see if that's something I can address next week. Otherwise, I tend to go with typical trends that I'm seeing in conversation, like recently the whole myth about the ATS eating your resume. So maybe I will dig into that next week because the ATS, the applicant tracking system, does not kick out your resume or eat your resume. So I will give you some more insights and resources on that next week. So I'm Anna Morgan, your career BFF. I am heading out here to continue getting ready to celebrate my little person's birthday. I really think that we should also be celebrating the mothers that gave birth to the children on the birthday, because I always think about what was I doing this time? Like I was getting ready to get admitted to the hospital, and at this time is when I got induced, and at this time was when I got the epidural, and this time was, when they were threatening a C-section, and I kicked everybody out of the room and meditated and prayed, and the nurse came back, and then I was ready to give birth, which is crazy. So just grateful to be a mom, grateful for this community, and I'll see you guys next week. Obviously, I'm emotional. See ya.